Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Chambliss lecture series. We're so glad that you could join us this afternoon for this special event. My name is Karen Rauch, and I am the Associate Provost for Accreditation and Assessment, and I'm happy to welcome you today. The Chambliss Faculty Research Award was inaugurated in 2004 through a gift from Dr. Carlson R. Chambliss, Professor Emeritus of Astronomy, and he was a member of the Physical Sciences Department from 1970 to 2003. The Chambliss Faculty Research Award recognizes the very highest achievement in research and scholarship. Each year, up to 2 awards can be given. The Faculty Research Awards can only be won once in a person's career. Each award has 3 components. One is a gold medal designed by Dr. Chambliss.
Gold-plated, by the way, I'm afraid, on those.
Gold-plated medal. That is a good distinction. Designed by Dr. Chambliss with the awardee's name engraved on it. The second component is a certificate of recognition. And the third is a cash award of $250. The 2021 recipients of this award are Dr. Albert Fu, Professor of Sociology, who gave his distinguished lecture in the spring, and today's presenter. And now I will pass the mic to Dr. David Bucher, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, who will introduce our speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our speaker. So Dr. Muhammad Ashraf Adeel earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of Peshawar and his PhD in philosophy from the University of Hawaii. He served as a professor at the University of Peshawar and was founding vice chancellor of Hazara University. Dr. Adeel began his Kutztown journey in 2006, and he's currently a professor of philosophy and the department chair for the Department of Philosophy. He's the driving force in organizing the annual World Philosophy Day presentation at KU, bringing bringing some very esteemed scholars to our university to engage with our students, faculty, and staff. His publication list is extensive. If I would go through his CV with you with all of his publications, we'd be here until next week. And so simply his most recent book-length publications include The Epistemology of the Quran, Elements of a Virtue Approach to the Knowledge and Understanding with Springer, and his second Urdu poetry book. And since my Urdu is a little rusty, I went with the translated title, Oceans in Dance. Recently, he's been very active in presenting and publishing his research stateside, as well as in Pakistan on a variety of topics. This evening, he will present his research on the very nature of things. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present Dr. Ashraf Adeel, 2021 KU Chambliss Faculty Research Award winner, and our speaker this evening. This is on, that one's on.
I guess I need to thank you all for coming over in this rather difficult weather. I'm also very grateful to Kutztown University, Chambliss Award Committee, and Dr. Chambliss himself for making it possible for us to be here this evening, and also for making it possible for me and a distinguished line of colleagues from KU to be honored with this award. Thank you, sir. Tonight, I'll be talking about understanding, the very nature of understanding. There has been a growing interest recently among epistemologists, theoreticians of knowledge, in this mental state that we call understanding. Traditionally, they were focused more on knowledge. But since, for the past 30, 40 years, they have done a whole lot of work in the field, and there's still a very heated debate going on almost on every little detail on this of this subject. I'm going to be able to present only an overview. Since this is a public lecture, we are not going to go into complicated back and forth, technical back and forth among philosophers. I'll just give you an overview. So first part, I'll simply look at, from a layman point of view, the difference between knowledge and understanding. I think it doesn't seem to. Sorry. Sound? We're stuck. Okay, so here we are. First, knowledge versus understanding. Just a quick overview. When philosophers talk about knowledge, they primarily talk about propositional knowledge. This is the knowledge of propositions or meanings of sentences, not the sentences themselves. For example, it is raining, is regnet, barish ho rahi hai, baran mi barat. There are 4 different sentences from 4 different languages, but they have the same meaning. Normal understanding of proposition is this meaning, though there is debate on that as well. So propositional knowledge is the knowledge of meanings of sentences. Examples are, I know that it is raining, I know that Asia is large, and I know that Socrates is dead, etc., etc. So it is primarily knowledge of individual propositions. When philosophers talk about understanding, they primarily talk about our grasping of a whole system of interrelationships between elements of a structure. These relations could be spatial, temporal, causal, logical, and conceptual. And structures could be physical or theoretical and artistic. For example, Newtonian mechanics will be a theoretical structure. So interrelationships between its axioms, which are the 3 laws of motion and the law of gravitation, and the rest of the theorems that have been derived from it, all the logical or causal or explanatory relationships. Grasping, understanding the system would mean that grasping those interrelationships, among other things. Hence, while knowledge is taken as knowledge of single propositions, understanding is primarily taken as holistic. Although, as we shall see shortly, there is such a thing as propositional understanding as well as atomistic understanding. Now, this makes holistic understanding a much more difficult epistemic achievement than knowledge, because knowledge is knowledge of propositions, individual. Understanding, holistic understanding at least, involves grasp of all these different types of interrelations Also, while knowledge could be gained in a lot of circumstances through testimony of a credible reporter, most of our knowledge is testimonial. We read books, we accept the propositions in them on the strength of our belief in the credibility of the reporter. Holistic understanding, on the other hand, cannot be so attained. Interrelations between parts and parts or parts and a whole must be personally grasped as ground for understanding. It is also worth keeping in focus that if I know that it is raining, then my belief that it is raining must be true. I cannot have knowledge if my belief is false. This is called factivity of knowledge as an epistemic state. So please keep this in mind, factivity of knowledge. However, many epistemologists believe that holistic understanding can involve at least some false beliefs about the object of our understanding. John can be said to have understanding of bioethics if most of his beliefs about the subject are true, though he might have some false beliefs as well. In this sense, holistic understanding is not factive, it is non-factive. There's a huge debate among philosophers about whether or not mental states such as knowledge, understanding, or feeling cold are transparent. In other words, when we know or understand something, do we know that we know? Or do we understand that we understand? To put it slightly differently, are we in a position to know or understand that we know or understand? While we are not concerned about this debate here, as we shall see, some philosophers take understanding to be transparent in this sense. In the same way of this comparison between knowledge and understanding, I want to share, a standard definition and some alternatives to it with you about the nature of knowledge. Tripartite definition or JTB definition of knowledge was the standard definition for many, many decades in 20th century. And it can be traced back to Greeks as well. I know that P under this definition will involve three things. I believe that P is true, and I am justified in believing that P. So belief, truth, and justification are the three elements of knowledge according to this standard definition. Now, justification is our ground for believing a proposition. Edmund Gettier pointed out in 1963 that justification has to be non-accidental. If my belief that P is true results from some lucky accident, then I don't have the knowledge that P. For example, I'm looking at a field and out there is a statue of a sheep. I don't know that it's a statue. I just formed the belief that out there in the field there is a sheep. Unbeknownst to me, behind the statue there is a real sheep. So by a lucky accident, my belief that there is a sheep in the field becomes true. Now this kind of accidentally true beliefs cannot be counted as knowledge, Gettier pointed out. This non-accidentality condition is a tough one. Philosophers have tried hard to meet it. Souza, who is the founder of virtue epistemology, for example, he suggested his safety condition to be added to the three components mentioned above, i.e., an epistemic agent would believe that P only if P was likely true. So 3 other conditions and this safety condition. Earlier then, Souza Nozick had given a sensitivity condition saying that the epistemic agent would believe P if it was true and would not believe P if it was false. So these should be added to the 3 other conditions in order to ensure that we get knowledge. But to that, there is no generally accepted way of meeting this non-accidentality condition. Hence, a lot of philosophers have come to despair meeting this condition and succeeding in rescuing the above definition of knowledge. Alternatives. There are many, but I'm just pointing out a few salient. Each one of them also has many versions. This one here, the first, knowledge first approach. This is British philosopher Williamson. According to him, knowledge is an unanalyzable mental state. It should not be defined in terms of belief justified by evidence. What we adduce as evidence must already be known to be the case, must already be knowledge. Hence, knowledge is first. Another more popular approach is that knowledge should be understood in terms of intellectual virtues. In other words, knowledge is virtuously formed through belief. Virtues here are understood as properly functioning epistemic faculties such as perception, reason, introspection, and memory, etc. by one school, reliabilist school, and intellectual virtues such as openness to new or contrary evidence, intellectual thoroughness, intellectual integrity, and intellectual conscientiousness in general by the other school who are called responsibilists. The idea is that beliefs formed with intellectual conscientiousness can attain the level of knowledge, or properly functioning faculties produce preponderance of true beliefs. Problems again. Some have argued that intellectual conscientiousness is necessary for producing true beliefs, but it may not be sufficient. We may exercise conscientiousness, we may exercise intellectual virtues like intellectual thoroughness, integrity, openness to new evidence. We do our best and still we may not be able to gain knowledge or elevate our belief to the level of knowledge. Secondly, knowledge first approach equates knowledge with evidence adduced for a belief, roughly. But we cannot assume that such evidence is immune to doubt. Such evidence cannot be knowledge in case we are all brains and weights being stimulated to give us sensations of normal life. Our evidence will be only seeming evidence. So debates on justified true belief definition, knowledge first, and virtue-based definitions, they continue. Now, forms of understanding in contemporary epistemology. These are some of the forms that have come out in the debate on the nature of understanding in the past few decades. Objectual or holistic understanding. This is understanding of a person, an art, or a discipline, etc. John understands bioethics. Pat understands music. Geeta understands her husband. Keith understands Newtonian mechanics. This is one form. Scientific understanding, most philosophers of science take scientific understanding to be causal explanation of an event. For example, tides, we explain them within Newtonian mechanics. the Newtonian laws. So they give a causal explanation of that process. Then you have propositional understanding. It is understanding of that clauses. I understand that P, where P is a proposition. Examples, I understand that the bus is late. Noor understands that Jim will come for dinner. Now, this type of understanding is normally equated with propositional understanding. Propositional knowledge. So the difference between propositional knowledge and propositional understanding, according to many epistemologists, does not exist. Other forms of understanding are different than knowledge. And then we have atomistic, what is called atomistic understanding by Pritchard, the British philosopher. This is understanding of why, where, what, and when questions. I understand why she is upset. Tim understands where the policy went wrong. Neil understands what your real intentions are. Amy understands when will things smooth out finally. These are examples of this type of atomistic understanding. So this was the first part where we just wanted to get a glimpse of the difference between knowledge and understanding. Now I come to call Jasper's views and forms of understanding in his work. Jaspers draws a distinction between explainable and understandable in the General Psychopathology, which came out in 1930. About the understandable, he says, we sink ourselves into the psychic situation of a patient and understand genetically by empathy how one psychic event emerges from another. About the explainable, he says, we find by repeated experience that a number of phenomena are regularly linked together, and on this basis, we explain causally. Jaspers adds that through empathetic experience, we grasp meaningful connections between psychic events. This is different from our experience of causal connections. There is a regularity and constancy to the linkages between events connected causally. That is not the case with the mental events. There is no mechanistic regularities that can be experienced or discovered as governing mental life. Jasper also distinguishes empathetic understanding from what he calls rational understanding. He says, rational understanding always leads to a statement that the psychic content was simply a rational connection, understandable without the help of any psychology. Empathetic understanding, on the other hand, always leads directly into the psychic connection itself. Hence, mental life or consciousness is not all of it understandable through discovering rational connections between psychic events. In particular, mental patients exhibit or experience psychic events that can be understood by only imaginatively sinking into the patient's psyche. Does that mean that empathetic understanding is extra-rational? I submit not. Presumably, it is creative or inventive reason, as Karl Popper would have it, that comes into play to see these special meaningful connections between psychic events. Jaspers also takes empathetic understanding to be factive when successful and distinguishes it from what he calls mere interpretation of a psychic connection. Successful or true empathetic understanding yields an insight that is self-evident or transparent. A mere interpretation is when empathetic effort fails to expose the experience to us correctly and we resort to placing an interpretive analysis on it. Jaspers makes the point from another angle as well. He draws a distinction between objective and subjective symptoms of mental disorder. Objective symptoms can all be directly and convincingly demonstrated to anyone capable of sense perception and logical thought. B, subjective symptoms cannot be perceived by the sense organs, but have to be grasped by transferring oneself, so to say, into the other individual's psyche, that is, by empathy. They can become an inner reality for the observer by his participating in the other person's experiences, not by any intellectual effort. Other passages in Jasper's work bring out the creative, artistic nature of how one understands meaningful connections between mental phenomena. Empathetic understanding appears to be like the creative insights of artists. Now we come to contemporary epistemologies. We'll highlight three positions: Zagzebski's, Kvanvig's, and Pritchard's, for comparing with Jasper's. All three of them are the leading lights of epistemology in our times. Zagzebski's view is this, that objectual or holistic understanding is the primary form of understanding. She accepts 2 points that come out of Plato. One, understanding is connected with mastery of an art, a skill, a technique. And 2, understanding involves grasping of relations between parts or between parts and a whole. These relations could be spatial, temporal, or causal, what Grimm characterizes as dependence relations. She adds a 3rd point of her own. We can attain propositional knowledge by testimony under appropriate conditions, but we cannot attain understanding by testimony. She grants that understanding can be a form of propositional knowledge, that is, seeing the interrelations between systems of propositions. But she wants to point to a non-propositional form of understanding as well, like the one we attain from a graph or a map. Personally, I think that maps and graphs, etc., are read by us propositionally in the last analysis. However, non-propositional form of understanding may exist in artistic contexts. She takes understanding to be transparent, but non-factive. Some of our beliefs, if we understand a subject matter, majority of our beliefs need to be true, but some might be false. That means non-effectivity of understanding. But she thinks that when we understand a subject, understand something, we understand that we understand. Secondly, Kvanvig, he distinguishes 3 types of understanding: objectual or holistic, propositional, and what he calls WH understanding, which is the understanding we gain through answers to our why questions. The primary form for him is holistic understanding. He says to understand is to grasp a variety of relations. It involves seeing explanatory connections, being aware of the probabilistic interrelationships, and apprehending the logical implications of the information in question. There is, of course, an element of factivity to the notion of understanding, just as there is with the notion of knowledge. End of quote. Kvanvig's WH understanding is the same as atomistic understanding in Pritchard's terms, to which we shall come momentarily. Now, Kvanvig takes understanding to be non-transparent and non-factual. He doesn't think that when we understand, we necessarily understand that we understand. And similarly, some of our beliefs about the subject which we understand might be false. We may not understand that we understand. Also, yes, some of the beliefs might be false. I've already said that. Now, Pritchard takes atomistic understanding to be primary or paradigmatic. His example: if I ask, why did my house burn? And I'm told the truth that it was due to faulty wiring, then I have this sort of understanding of the matter. Basically, it's causal explanation. He considers such understanding to be transparent but non-factual and immune to what he calls environmental epistemic luck. That is to say, such understanding is not blocked by an agent's looking by sheer luck at the real cause or object among a host of fake ones. I mean, there might be a whole lot of fake sheep out there in the field, one real one, and you accidentally look at that one. If that's the cause of your, for explaining a certain event, then you still will have understanding. You may not have knowledge, but you will have understanding. However, such understanding is, according to him, not immune to what is called Gettier-style epistemic luck, which can intervene between the ability of an agent to know or understand and his success in reaching the true belief. Although one is looking at the wrong source for a belief, one accidentally forms the right belief due to a lucky coincidence of the right source also being present. Sheep behind the sheep statue. Zagzebski and Kovanvik also consider understanding to be immune to environmental epistemic luck. If we accidentally hit upon the right interrelations between various parts of a structure in an environment where a lot of false interrelations are being displayed or argued for, we still succeed in understanding the structure according to them. Fourth part, comparison. None of the three contemporary epistemologists take holistic or atomistic understanding to be both factive and transparent. Jasper's empathetic understanding is therefore unique. For him, it is both factive and self-evident or transparent. We can see that it is not holistic. It is not aimed at understanding a whole system of meaningful connections between mental events. But can we equate it with the atomistic understanding of contemporary epistemology? The answer, I think, again, is no. Atomistic understanding, in Pritchard's words, finds expression in statements like, quote, I understand why such and such is the case, end of quote. This is obviously a causal explanation of the event in question. Jasper's empathetic understanding is not causal, as we have already seen. Therefore, when Jaspers draws his distinction between the explainable and understandable, he talks about causal explanation on the one hand and rational as well as empathetic understanding on the other. Rational understanding grasps the rational connections between psychic events. It may not be strictly causal, but it gives us intellectual grasp on the connections. Empathetic understanding has no set rational or causal rules. In Jasper's own words, we have to be led, starting from the outside, to a real appreciation of a psychic phenomenon by looking at its genesis, the conditions for its appearance, its configurations, its context and possible concrete contents, also by making use of intuitive comparison and symbolization, by directing our observation in whatever ways may suggest themselves as artists do penetratingly and by demonstrating already known phenomena which appear to play some part in the formation of the phenomenon studied. End of quote. Though such participation in the psychic event of another, through such participation in the psychic event of another, we can perhaps attain empathetic understanding. Since there are no law-like generalizations in case of psychic events, the relationship between them needs to be understood in terms of one particular event leading to another. No generality or regularity is expected. We need a fresh personal intuition every time to grasp such relationship. If successful, such empathetic intuition gives us a self-evidently true insight into the meaning of the connection between two events. This is like poetic or artistic insight. In conclusion, in addition to propositional, holistic, atomistic, and causal forms of understanding identified in contemporary epistemology, therefore, we need to pay attention to empathetic understanding, or what might also be called empathetic/artistic form of understanding. It is non-holistic, effective, and transparent as an initial intuition. However, it might need a public criterion for confirming or disconfirming its veracity subsequently. We cannot obviously leave it at the private level. So I submit that the creative and inventive reason of an artist, aided by imagination, can bring her in direct contact with certain otherwise inaccessible aspects of reality and life. The process of artistic creation is intuitive, but also empathetic, in the sense of the artist transferring herself into the mind or nature of her subject. Greater attention to the nature of artistic creation can give us a better grip on the nature of empathetic understanding. We do need empathy in this day and age. Thank you. So I'm asked to look after the questions myself. You are most welcome. Questions, comments, please. Yes, yes.
I'm guessing that a lot of the discussion that's going on around this topic in philosophy circles now would relate to artificial intelligence and how these ideas could be applied to artificial intelligence. I don't have a more specific question than that, but I just ask you to provide any insight on that.
Yes, epistemology is definitely epistemological insights are of great use to people working in artificial intelligence. A lot of them are, in fact, people who have training in epistemology and artificial intelligence. So yeah, these things are definitely spilling over into other disciplines. Empathetic understanding, systematic work on that, there's not much. And since the psychic events of people with mental disorder are the psychic events which attend the life of some of our artistic geniuses, they are very unique and can be understood only through empathy, if at all. Therefore, greater attention to empathetic understanding needs to be paid. But as I said, the shift of attention from knowledge, propositional knowledge, which is piecemeal basically, to understanding where holistic understanding is taken to be primary by most. That is recent, and a lot of work still needs to be done. So then debates between the epistemologists are also pretty heated. So, but I mean, I don't know if there's someone from computer science who can throw better light on the subject, they are welcome. Yes, please.
I was curious about how the verification of empathetic understanding occurred.
Would work, yeah.
So someone feels they understand a work of art or something, and then how is that verified or reinforced? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, or if someone thinks that, two psychic events have this particular connection between them, and they sort of through empathy have grasped it, and it appears self-evident to them that this is true. This is a lot of the time a direct insight for Jaspers. It's a direct intuition, a direct participation through which you grasp this relationship. And artists also understand certain aspects of reality through this kind of direct seeing, direct vision, direct intuition. But a whole lot of the time, when people see this kind of connections intuitively between mental events or aspects of life and experience, they need not turn out to be always right. If this is so private, so once they express their insight in language, make it public, then it can be scrutinized by ordinary scientists by the normal standards. And it may or may not be a genuine insight. But sometimes it turns out to be a correct insight on the part of the artist. So verification process is the standard process for social sciences, or but even in social sciences, the way we try to see intellectual connections, rational connections between various events. We may not have causal laws in social sciences, but we can have rational explanations. We can find reasons as to how the two events are connected. And the initial discovery, though, was not rational, it was empathetic. It was through the artist transferring herself into the psyche of the other person, or into that aspect of life and experience which he or she has grasped in her artwork. But the subsequent process is similar to a process of confirmation or disconfirmation that we subject ordinary propositions of social sciences. I mean, that's my. Yes, please.
So it seems you have an interest in Urdu poetry. I think Dr. Bukra mentioned that you wrote a book on Urdu poetry, which, as you know, has a long and deep history. And it's an artistic construct, it's a creative construct. To what extent, if any, did that impact, or does that impact how you're thinking about the nature of understanding this, especially with reference to, the nature of understanding in relationship to artistry and the work of an artist? Yeah,
thank you. I think that's a powerful question. The thing is that, artistic creation, I mean, the work that I have done in art, some poetry, it's mostly, inventive reason, intuitively trying to grasp some relations, some experiences, and imagination is key. So reason in its inventive mode, guided by imagination, can help you enter into the soul of that experience as an artist. So, for example, you have this idea of an expanding universe in cosmology. But when an artist takes it up and writes a poem, I read a beautiful poem I read, in the New Yorker a few years ago. The grip on the idea is totally unique. It brings you totally new insights. It's not like a scientific lecture. It's not like logical connections or explanatory connections. It's a unique angle. And maybe one day that unique angle gets exposed to the working scientists as well, cosmologists as well. But right now, it is the artists who cite. And in due course of time, that might be subjected to scientific testing and ultimately one day might turn out to be verified. But let me repeat. Karl Popper, one of the leading philosophers of science, he says that reason has primarily just two functions. Inventions of myths and critique of myths. All of our theories are right from the days of Thales, the founding father of science and philosophy, up until now. They are huge myths for grasping the nature of interrelationships between different aspects of reality and life and experiences. We invent these myths, that is one function of reason, and then we get busy to criticize them. Some parts get verified, others get abandoned so that we can replace these earlier myths with the newer ones. These are the primary functions, according to Karl Popper, of rationality. So, inventive reason with imagination, and of course, a heart, a feelingful, throbbing heart that takes the artist right into the heart of his or her subject. These are my submissions in the meeting. Yes, please.
When you speak of myth, do you reference Roland Barthes' definition of myth or a more abstract concept?
Well, myth, I'm primarily, using it in the sense in which philosophers like Karl Popper and Quine, the great American logician and philosopher, they use it. In his very famous article, Two Dogmas of Empiricism, around the end, he talks about scientific, he characterizes our scientific theories, scientific understanding of the world also as a myth, and that is the sense. So it's not myth in a limited sense. All our ideas are primarily myths to the extent that they ultimately do not measure up to the ultimate nature of truth. We sooner or later are forced to revise them. History of science is actually the history of disconfirmed theories. We are just waiting for the newest ones to be disconfirmed and revised. So myths in every sense, in artistic sense, in the sense of, in historical sense, and, in the sense of myths of the, primitive times of our humanity. All of them, their nature is the same. They are invented ideas to get some handle on our surrounding. But the guy whose name you mentioned, I really haven't read his book. What's the name again, please?
Roland Barthes, he wrote semiology or semiologies,
Oh, okay, I'll look that up.
mythologies as well.
I'll look that up. I'm not familiar with his work. Thank you. Yeah, the young lady over there. You raised your hand earlier. The other. You. Yes. No,
Oh, that was my question.
you. Okay, go ahead, please.
One of the undercurrents I've been hearing has to do with language right from the start, where you were using the 4 languages, but even in the comments on myths and on poetry. Can you say a little bit more about just language in relation to knowledge versus language in the relation to understanding?
Contemporary analytic philosophy is basically philosophy which tries to understand theories and concepts and principles, ideas, myths through an analysis of language. Philosophers have decided after, Gottlieb Frege, Bertrand Russell, and Wittgenstein, that our best handle on reality is through our language. We cannot get into each other's heads to see each other's ideas. The only way we have access to each other's ideas is through the language in which people express their ideas, whether they are philosophers or ordinary folks, whether they are scientists or ordinary folks. So in order for me to understand someone's concepts or theories or ideas or myths or whatever, or religion or culture, I need to understand the language in which those things are presented. And the initial phase of philosophy of language was that let us try to get to the logical form of the propositions and through them try to understand what the meaning of this given proposition or this given system of propositions, which we call a theory or a myth, happens to be. But that phase, had its own difficulties. People moved into different directions, and of course, number of different theories of meanings were developed. But the focus of analytic tradition remains on language. You take, for example, epistemic terms like belief, knowledge, understanding. According to analytic tradition, the most important, the basic way to get an insight into these epistemic terms is analyze the propositions in which these terms are used. And of course, there can be many different analyses of the same term. And depending on what analysis you accept, you can understand the whole system of connections of that term with other terms through that analysis. But that's the basic thing in philosophy of language, analytic philosophy. Analyze the language carefully. And that's how you understand concepts, whether they are epistemic or otherwise. I mean, that depends on the context. Anything else? Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adeel, for your lecture. I would be remiss, however, if I did not at least acknowledge some of the folks who are with us here in person and also online. If they would be so kind, we have several previous Chambliss Award winners who are with us here today. And if you all would be so kind as to stand up so that we can acknowledge you as well for just a moment, that would be wonderful. John, Amy. And one thing that happened with each of those was there was a presentation of that gold-plated coin that happened at the beginning of the year ceremony that, due to conditions beyond our control, Dr. Adeel was not able to have that honor. So joining us up here at this time is Dr. Hawkinson.
Got the medals there? Or the certificates? Okay, I think I get usually one of those.
Yes, I'll let you do that one. And so I'm honored to be able to give this to you. When we presented this last year, announced it, you read a wonderful poem, as I recall.
Yes.
And so I was very inspired by that and very delighted to come and hear your lecture today. That poem was beautiful.
Thank you.
I look forward to reading more of your poetry.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to receive it from you and Dr. Chambliss. Thank you for establishing this. Thank you.
Okay, and actually you should be in the middle. Let me go this way.
See, I should be on this here. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, now here you go. Box that goes with it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the formal portion of our ceremony. If you would care to join Dr. Adeel out in the lobby for some light refreshments. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.